So here we go, struggling once again against all those demon forces on Zoom. Tommy McCay, your verbal Viking plunderer of conversation. We've got a rock solid show that's going to be coming to you, jingle jangle, as we work everybody into the show as best we can. First of all, let's bring David Oldham in. As we record the show for later broadcast due to technical difficulties, there is David Oldham. David Oldham, how are you doing for this exciting Monday evening?
I'm doing fabulously, thank you.
Wow, you look not even a bead of sweat. We've got Al Gerhardt in the waiting room to talk about all things State Question 805. But first, real quickly, tell us about your exciting weekend. We know you hit it off with a lady. I tried to take credit for the matchmaking, but apparently something else was going on beforehand. But anyway,
what's that?
I was going to say, you just ran off and found yourself your own Bond girl.
Yeah, well, I have somebody to occupy the right seat of the COVID chase car from now on.
Well, the navigator.
The former Lori Gracie and I tied the knot, and we took off and went to Florida to do it.
Nice.
In good pirate style, we did it our way and exchanged vows on the beach and had a very wonderful week. And so I wasn't here last week, but anyway, we were in the middle of Florida or North Florida. We went to St. Augustine, which was just gorgeous,
right,
and replete with history and tourism and not too many masks. I mean, there were plenty, but the place had opened up, and so it was really interesting. And
nice.
we made some trouble while we were there. So
well, very good. Well, that's good to hear. I'm glad everything went well. We're going to talk later after Al comes on. We talk State Question 805. We'll talk a little bit about Judge Amy Coney Barrett and Stare Decisis, as well as the Drive for 45 rally that happened. But let's bring Al Gerhardt in. Ladies and gentlemen, we should see him joining shortly. He's stuck. There he is, ladies and gentlemen. Al Gerhardt, co-founder of Sooner Tea Party, here to talk about State Question 805. Al, I appreciate you. We're struggling through all of the technical difficulties as we record this for later broadcast. We had troubles going live this evening, but I appreciate you hanging in there with great patience. It's great to meet you finally over the Zoom. And so, Al Gerhardt, thanks for joining us.
Well, thanks for inviting me.
You bet. We're going to talk State Question 805, but there may be some people who watch now or later who don't know about the Sooner Tea Party. Tell us a quick history of Sooner Tea Party, how you co-founded it, what it does, and where it's been and what it does in the future.
Wow. Well, we started in 2009, and originally I was just kind of like I don't know what you'd call me. I kind of arranged things, and it kind of got forced into my hands as far as leadership. We kind of went from a Tea Party into investigative journalism, and we started a weekly newsletter on Sunday night. It goes out to about 6,000 people. And we just started going after the bad guys, holding them accountable. And of course, that got me in some trouble. Everybody remembers a blackmail case, the Tea Party blackmail case.
Yeah, that was ridiculous.
Well, probably one of the better things that ever happened to me politically, because
Really?
It made me, pretty hard to defeat. Once you've been through that, they're like, well, he ain't going to quit.
Right.
We got to find another way. We can't go after him. And after that, it's just like we've, tried to support the good guys, plow a path for them, and go after the bad guys.
That's great. That's great. The Tea Party goes back 2009. That's before a lot of these kids even knew what was going on these days. So,
and I didn't know what was going on in 2009, and so.
That's good though. No, I remember the whole that whole case. I mean, blackmail, boy, that's a term used loosely. And I was surprised that it even went as far as it did in the courts. It was ridiculous.
Well, you got to remember that Prater, I had taken him before the grand jury, the multi-county grand jury, just a year before that. So
okay.
his rear end was bright red at that point, and he was payback.
Payback is right, yeah.
And it was just one of those things. They thought they had a shot. Hey, we'll get him on this, and turned out they were wrong.
Right, right. Well, exactly. They had nothing on you. Okay. So, state question
Well,
805.
actually, they just so
Yeah.
the
Go
record
ahead.
is clear. They got a conviction.
They did. I was a
And
felon
here-
for about a year and a half.
And here is the problem, and what I'm calling for judicial reform is it should never even have seen the light of day, let alone result in a conviction. The jury was
Right.
manipulated into creating a felony conviction on a First Amendment free speech rights case that had to get overturned later. That is a crime right there. That Al went through all of that was a crime. And where is the judge? Where's the DA? Where's any of this? Where have they paid for their crimes? Not at all. They're still in office. So,
Yeah,
so
it's
just
next
be
to
aware.
impossible. It's next to
Yeah, just to be-
impossible to go after a prosecutor.
Right.
I guess.
Right.
Yeah.
It's hard, but that's what we've got to start working on. So just so people are aware, he was deemed a felon and he never was. So
Well,
yeah,
yeah, it was. I mean, if you can't send an email, then I mean, if those guys are frightened by an email, I mean, wow, that's taking textualism to a new height.
yeah.
All right, state question 805. Let's go ahead and get your take on it. You've probably heard some of the debate in favor of it, suggesting that it's going to keep us from extending with sentence enhancements some of these sentences beyond what is reasonable. What do you know about it, and what's your attitude, Al Gerhardt?
Well, currently a prosecutor can extend a sentence. He can, enhance a sentence if you had a previous felony in the previous 10 years. If the minimum sentence is less than 5 years, about all they can do is double your sentence to 10 years. If there is no recommended sentence, they can either add 2 years to it, or it can go up to life in prison, believe it or not. If it's a felony that is over 5 years in a minimum sentence recommended for a minimum sentence for that crime, they can take it, double it up to three times, even life in prison. And that seems a little bit heavy-handed. But what we see is that it's rarely used except to pressure these. Now, this is a problem in itself. They pressure the defendants into, skipping the trial and just pleading guilty. Not that I'm any fan of that. I'd rather they force them into having every trial, no plea deals, and make everything a trial. But it's not used that often because they're not crazy. They know that prisons are getting full. And to be honest with you, most of these criminals that you research, including they've got poster childs up on their website. There's 6 of them. Well, one of them is an uncle of a young lady, and you can't find out what his last name is. But the other 5, they had decades, in some cases, a decade and a half of crimes before they ever got sent to prison.
And these are poster children on the website of the people that are in favor of state question.
Correct.
805. Okay. And so they're kind of a sketchy, nearly anonymous, is what you're saying.
Well, no, you can look them up, and that's the problem. They're career criminals.
I got you.
There's one young lady. It's the youngest lady on there, and she looks like she got in drugs for a couple of years. But even her, she got a suspended sentence, which meant all she had to do was pay her fines and fees, $25 a month, and she never went to prison. She just had to keep her nose clean and pay those fines, and she refused to do it. Now, she was probably hooked on drugs because she was behind on child support and everything else. But the long story is, in Oklahoma, in the big cities, I'm going to qualify that, you have to work really hard to get sent to prison. They give you so many chances: deferred sentences, drug court, suspended sentences. And what you see is the vast majority of these guys just keep messing up time and time again. And as a society, what are we going to do with these folks? I don't know.
Oldham, what do you know?
Well, I mean, the question is the. I mean, you mentioned the extorting of plea deals, and is that right? Now, I'm a constitutionalist, and I don't believe that that's legitimate, because people will take a plea deal because because they can pile numbers on so high that they look at the expense that they're not going to be able to pay back because they may end up in prison. And then the time that they would end up in prison, they just make a calculated guess, and that makes them a felon, even if they're not actually guilty. So you've got people that are taking plea deals, becoming felons, and then getting enhancements. How is that just? With
Well,
the enhancement, just because we're only talking about the enhancements, we're not talking about the range of time that the legislature set up. We're talking about, oh no, you're getting extra time because this is number 1 or 2 or 3, and outside of the range for whatever their crime may be, petty or grand.
think of it this way. They were given all these chances and finally got convicted of a violent felony. And they served their time and got out, and the slate should be clean, correct? However, they didn't learn because they're right back to the same old lifestyle.
Al,
How do we deal with that?
Chris Steele would say right there, well, the violence crimes are excluded. Is that what they're saying? That it has to do with what is the definition of a violent crime also. So,
Okay.
is it doesn't 805 exclude the violent crimes according to definition?
It does. The problem is you've got things like domestic assault and battery. You got strangulation during a domestic. You got domestic violence with a weapon. You got assault of a police officer. You've got just a whole host. Pretty much all your second and third degree crimes, which would be like burglary. You break into someone's house. As long as they're second or third degree, they're not considered quote unquote violent crimes. Now, the violent crimes are those ones, there's probably 50 of them, I'd say 40 or 50 of them, that you have to spend 85% of your sentence. But most of these crimes, when you look down the list, well, I'd consider a lot of these crimes as violent. Let's see if we've got the list right here. I can find it.
And again, Oldham was pointing out the other day, what we all view as violent is one thing from a colloquial standpoint, but the legal definition is going to be different. Maybe you've got that there, Al.
Yeah, here we go. Okay, domestic assault and battery with a dangerous weapon, a knife or a gun or a baseball bat. Domestic assault and battery by strangulation. Aggravated assault and battery. That's where you pretty much it wasn't a heat of passion. You thought this out and you did it. Second,
These are
third.
well, this is a list of which ones. What are you listing off here?
These are considered nonviolent. Second, third, and fourth degree arson, escape from prison, endangering others while eluding the police, assault and battery on a police officer, assault and battery on a medical worker.
So here's some ridiculousness in agreement with you, I think, Al, is that, assault and battery is violence. Mm-hmm. How is it that they can say in this paradox that assault and battery on a police officer is not a violent crime? What is it? How do they, this literally, assault is a crime, right?
Well, someone got the bright idea to label only violent crimes as those 85% crimes. Cruelty to animals, second degree burglary. What else we got here? Well, drug trafficking, that doesn't have to be a violent crime. I guess it could be.
No, that's where I brought up with Chris Steele was the fact that, the talk about 85%, almost everything in the nonviolent category, the large majority of it could be swept aside if we weren't in this drug war. If we didn't suggest that crime and drug usage is the same thing, there's a vice and there's a crime, and we're treating the vice like a crime. That's how we're filling the jails. Do you agree with that, Al?
I agree. We've got a problem with it. And if I was dictator for the day, what I would do, I would take all drug crimes. Let me rephrase that. I'd take all drug addiction and I would make it into a mental illness, because you have to be crazy in order to do that to yourself. The problem is, and where it gets really complicated is whenever they commit all these crimes. Probably 90% of the crime in Oklahoma, when you talk to the bail bondsmen, are done by drug addicts. These people cannot afford their marijuana. They can't afford their whatever they're using, their meth, and they're going to break into your house and get it.
But I mean, that's where they that's where they switch over in my mind from doing a vice that is harming oneself, and then when they steal a VCR or sell it for drugs, that's the crime. I mean, I don't. We shouldn't be prosecuting on the vice. Is my point. We should be prosecuting on the crime. And when you say you got to serve, back to this point of people serve 85% of their time. I mean, that's kind of a ridiculous concept. When you talk about criminal reform, why are we worried about the lower level criminals committing what are questionably violent crimes when we're joking about 80? You really got to try hard to serve 85% of your sentence. How about the whole sentence? Why don't you say, I mean, why don't we do criminal reform at the high end is what I was saying, Chris Steele. But this is state question 805. Tell me about the wording of the ballot language. It seems like it starts off with an exclusion. It seems like horrible verbiage right off the bat.
Well, it was written by by attorneys and social justice warriors, and they want to leave it open to litigation. Of course they do.
Oh,
That's
yeah.
where that's where they're going to make their big wins, is getting these soft on crime judges down at the Capitol, down at the Supreme Court and the Court of Criminal Appeals, to basically side with them. But you go back to the sentencing, like 20 years sounds pretty harsh, but when you realize these people really, unless it's an 85% crime, and you're a bad dude if you get put in there on an 85% crime,
Right.
you're pretty much going to spend about a quarter or to 20% of that time in prison, and you're going to be out. So a 20-year sentence, you're talking maybe 4 to 5 years.
Yeah, but you're not really out. You're on probation or parole, right?
Okay.
So you've still got 20 years of being on probation or parole before you're free. You're not free in that time. Even though you're out, you're not free.
Well, from a victim standpoint, I wouldn't be pleased the minute you were out on parole. I'd be like, wow, guy's out again.
Let's look at one of their poster children. Her name is, since she's outed herself, we can talk about her. Her name is Sonia Piles, Pyles, and she had 12 felonies. We're talking bill drumping, we're talking drugs, multiple burglary, multiple breaking and entering, multiple drug trafficking, multiple shoplifting, multiple check forgery, multiple fake driver's license used in a commercial transaction, multiple counterfeit checks, several instances of using a fake ID to evade the police. Then she had 6 misdemeanors that were anything from hot checks to shoplifting. And this is all in a fairly short period of time. It would have been 1994 to 2012 when they finally put her away for a while. Well, guess what? She didn't get caught. She didn't get caught every time she committed a crime.
Right.
I don't know how many times she got caught, but I guarantee you it's not more than 1 in 10, 1 in 20. So this woman left a trail of destruction behind her. And when you break into someone's house, okay, let's say the last time I got burglarized, they got maybe about $2,000 worth of guns. Yeah, I'm the south side of Oklahoma City, so it's like it's going to happen. They got $2,000 worth of gun. They destroyed the door and the door frame. We're talking about $500 if you're a carpenter, which I am, to fix it. And so they took these items and went out and sold them for 5% of their value, 10% of their value. Now, it may cost $40,000 a year to keep this woman in prison. Well, we need to be looking at that because we ought to be putting her to work. She ought to be in a prison industry, making a wage, paying back her victims, paying back the state for the cost of incarcerations. And it shouldn't be costing $40,000. But if it did cost $40,000 to keep her off the street, I guarantee you that the citizens would be much, much better off by a factor of 10 having her put away.
Oldham, what do you got?
Oh, that's an interesting thought. I think though the question, especially with 805, is couldn't the range be set appropriately for these people? I mean, because right now for enhancements, you don't get a trial for enhancements. You get a hearing, but you don't get a trial, which means there's no jury of fact. There's no trial court to make a recommendation. You actually get a recommendation from the trial court, and then they go, yeah, no, we're not going to worry about that. We're going to do our own thing anyway. Isn't that what 805 is really working on? And if that doesn't work, can't the legislature come along and change the range for the various crimes that are committed, or are we going to, or I mean, because right now we've got just this nebulous, oh, they're a career criminal, and there's no trial of fact. It's just what you've got on the record, and then that's going to be used to set up your your thing. I mean, so couldn't we do this a different way? I mean, couldn't we go with 805 and then come back and adjust the range for sentencing? Oh, I think you
Is
might be
that me?
muted, or you got cut out. Somebody, we can't hear you, Al.
God, let's hope it's not me.
No, I think he came disconnected. Did you come disconnected, Al?
Check your plugins, because that happened to me last week.
I think he heard me, but we can't hear him. Did you get muted? Did you mute yourself somehow?
Everything is live here, seeing it, and I can
It looks good. I don't see Zoom muting him, but I can't hear a word.
Can you hear me?
There you
Now I
are.
can.
Oh, sorry. I see what I did. My little headphone here had a little button that got hit.
Oh, good. Hey,
Sorry
that
about
happened
that,
to me.
guys.
Hey, that happened to me last week.
Well, those are all really good points. But imagine yourself on a jury and you give a guy 20 years in prison, and then 4 years later you see him out walking around.
Right.
Or else the case gets suspended. Or the guy and basically he's not a felon unless he messes up again. And again, if you've got, let's take a guy that's trafficking child pornography, or maybe he's a guy that's a flasher. Okay, and he flashes kids on the school ground or something, or in the park. Does his first offense, does it need to be any harsher than his fourth offense? At what point do we say this man is not learning from the criminal justice?
Okay, so this is a great question. Before we delve into it, this is one of the problems with State Question 805 is that we're finding controversy because there's a dichotomy between whether we are dealing with people in a penitentiary sort of way. Are we looking for them to reform and be repentant? Or are we looking to dissuade these people from doing it by making these sentences stronger? So this is one of the things that is a dichotomy, because there's no argument really, I think, in my mind, Al, that if a guy continues to be worse and worse, I've raised 5 kids. It's like at some point you're like, dude, you're in trouble, and that the first time they get caught, like you said, is not the first time they've done it. And so, I think one of the things that when I read the 805, my first reaction was it looked like they took a big stick and just stirred up a big mess for lawyers to make money on. It's just all it will do is confuse so many issues in so many areas. It'll just be a litigation fest for years is what it looks like.
Well, it's projected.
I mean, the first thing it does is go ahead.
It's projected to save about between $15 and $40 million a year once it gets rolling. I think it's going to be far less than that. They said $27 million a year. But when we look at how much we spend on prisons, we spend a total of 2% of our budget on prisons. To me, I mean, I think Oldham is going to agree with me on this, is that one of the few things the government is supposed to do is protect me from you and you from me. And so keeping prisoners, keeping people that will not follow the law away from the rest of us is probably one of their better uses of our tax money. If 2% is not too much, where do we stop? I mean, shouldn't we just quit arresting people at all and the prisons would be empty before long?
Well, and I would agree with you that at some point there's no reason to arbitrarily enforce any of these laws if you're not going to enforce them all.
Well, I think in this particular case, if 20 years meant 20 years and it didn't mean some arbitrary number, if there was something, if things were more predictable, it might make the whole thing easy. My problem and why I like 805, and now mind you, I would prefer a different approach to the whole thing. because I see the enhancements as inherently unconstitutional, and that's because not everybody is being treated by the the same scorecard, basically. You've got, it's like, oh no, you've been in trouble, so you get a different scorecard. So the 14th Amendment is out the window. Equal protection under the law is out the window. The other problem is that you don't see your full due process, not especially not on the enhancement side of things. So I have a problem with the way the practice has been going, and in Oklahoma we create too many felons, and then we call them felons, and we don't consider whether what they were arrested for and convicted of was actually a felony. Like Al, if he hadn't been exonerated by the Supreme Court, as he should have been, he would remain today a felon, and if anything happened, it would be a second charge, and he would be under a potential enhancement. So I have a problem with that, and this is one way to fix it. And the workarounds, if we don't like this fix, is to go back and rework the actual times and for the various crimes that are committed. I just don't see that there's a downside to 805.
Oldham, also, I want you to comment. I mean, do you like the idea that they're doing it through a constitutional amendment? And when the comment was made on Sooner Politics that it's like there's no reason to do this through the constitutional amendment. What do you got on that?
Well, the problem, I don't like it being done through the constitutional amendment. I wish the judiciary would abide by the Constitution and would give people full due process, and would uphold the 14th Amendment, and quite frankly, the very exact language that we have in Article 2 of our own Constitution. So I wish that was the case. Sadly, the only thing they seem to respond to is a constitutional amendment. And it's the only thing that the legislature can't come and just undo next year because they didn't like it.
Al Gerhardt, what do you got?
Well, this was pointed out to me by a legislator, actually, and he said, you realize that once this gets passed, and I said, look, let's do this. Let's just go in there and change the sentencing, the sentencing for these things. First offense, you get this many years. Second, he said, we won't be able to do it because by doing so, it would be overturning the will of the people. Now, the other thing you have to understand about these career criminals, and these are the people that are getting swept up in this. These are the ones that are refusing to pay that $25 a month or $40 a month on those fees. If they would just do that, in almost every case I looked at their poster children today, 5 out of the 6, it was all about their sentences got, they call it accelerated. Basically, you refuse to pay the fines and fees. You might do it for a few months and you quit. Well, they're going to, hey, pay up or we're going to unsuspend your suspended sentence. Okay. Well, what happens with most of these career criminals is once they get arrested, they don't stop committing crimes, because this is just like David Van going to work every day and painting houses or hanging Christmas tree lights. This is their job. This is what they do. So when they get arrested, they keep right on committing crimes. And in many cases, you'll see them committing 3 or 4 other felonies while they're out on bail or while they're awaiting trial. Now, what happens when they go to trial? Well, they lose on the first one. They plead guilty to all the other ones, and they get sentenced. I have seen as many as 150 years of sentences handed down to these guys in one setting, in one trial, one little bitty case, right? And then what they do is say, well, you serve these concurrently. So you take that 150, you divide it by 4. And well, guess what? You're really only talking about 4 or 5 years and the guy's back out on the street.
Right.
So if you want to fix this thing, if you want to stop crime, it's no different than dealing with a 3-year-old. Justice has to be swift. It has to be sure. And if the jury gives a person 20 years for a crime, well, those 12 people must have really thought carefully. Now, I'm not crazy about juries. I mean, look what they did to me. What happened to me was we had some holdouts and they decided they wanted to go see the Thunder basketball game.
Well, we've got to get our priorities straight.
Yeah. In that old WPA courthouse down there at the Oklahoma City courthouse, they've got big old air shafts. and you can sit in the judge's office and you can listen in to the jury deliberating.
You're
And
kidding me.
no, we were told this, and it was an open secret around there. And we were told that night that, look, they're about to break. And it was kind of funny because the judge tried to throw it into a mistrial. He tried to send the jury home for the night, and this is after he sat there for half an hour during jury instructions and told them they would not be going home under any circumstances. That if someone dies, someone gets sick, too bad, you're there until this is over with. So at 8 o'clock, he calls us in and says, well, we're going to send the jury home because it's late. And my lawyer said, I smell a rat, and I do too. We're not going to go for this. And then they come back and say, well, the jury's come in with the verdict. And the judge was madder than hell because he wanted to throw this into a mistrial. And, they were going to go home, do some Googling or something, and they'd find out. But you come back to this whole thing. You have to work really hard to get sent to prison to start with. And this is going to affect, I think the OCPA said it was 2,700 people this is going to affect. And what it's going to do is going to take a lot of these career criminals that we've got safety locked away right now, and it's going to turn them right back out on the street. Because 805, not only does it change the enhanced sentences, but these people that were in prison for this reason they get an appeal. Basically, they approach the parole board or somebody like that, and if they don't get it, they get to appeal it, and we have to provide them an attorney.
Right. And that's not going to save any money right there. Let me reset. As we have rolled for a long time, we had a hard time getting the recording started. We'll go live later. Al Gerhardt, co-founder of the Sooner Tea Party, and of course, David Oldham, back from an exciting weekend from constitutionalgrounds.com, ladies and gentlemen. So we're going to talk a little bit further about State Question 805 with Mr. Al Gerhardt, Sooner Tea Party co-founder. I think one of the things that I've noticed about this whole argument is, it has to do, I think there's some confusion as to whether we're going to deal with these criminals that are caught up in the system as are we going to reform them, or are we going to try to scare them through punishment? I did speak to a guy 2 or 3 weeks ago whose wife does the intake for the state, and he knew some of the homeless people out there in downtown. He says, there are 10 different places that take the homeless indigents. You get 3 strikes at each one of these 10 places, and then you can't go back. And so if they are on the street and unwelcome at any one of these 10 places, that means they've screwed up 30 times. That means they're unwelcome 30 times. And the discussion we were having is some of these people, and Al, you're saying, these career criminals, and then the people who are for State Question will say, some of these people are just down on their luck. And it's true. This is one of the confusions we have, is that there is a mix of people. When they did the curfew, they would say, well, there's no reason a minor should be on the street at 7, after hours. Well, a minor 3-year-old or a minor 17-year-old. So we're mixing. There are some people who want to be the career criminal that you're talking about, and then the other people that need some reformation. How do we sort those people out?
When you talk, it's kind of like talking about corrupt politicians. If you want to talk with me about corrupt politicians, I want to say, what politician and what did he do specifically?
Right.
Because you can't throw a wide net on this thing. All I can tell you is for the past 5 or 6 years, we've been doing probably once a month, sometimes twice a month. We'll do profiles on these criminals. Okay. And usually anytime teen would pop up a new poster child, the first thing you got to go do is look into that. And of course, a year later, they're back in prison. At this point, if you're a criminal in the state of Oklahoma, you may not have any bond that you have to pay. You don't have to hire an attorney. You're going to plead out. You're going to get a deferred or suspended sentence until you've been through the ringer 8 or 9 times. At that point, you don't have to hire an attorney. It's you have no costs. You spend a few weeks sitting down there in jail until you get released on an OR. And they've given murderers ORs, own recognizance, no bond. Murderers. Okay.
I don't even get that.
I'm telling you, I had to put up money, man, to get out, well, they walked me through. I never got to sit in the jail cell, but had I not had that privilege, with knowing the bondsman like I do, but you have to work so hard to ever get there in the first place. and you've already messed up so many times. Now, I think David has got a great idea about, okay, we need to adjudicate whether this person is a career criminal. We probably need some clear, you know, clear standards on that. But the trouble with standards is if you've got flexibility in the system like we have right now, for instance, if there is no minimum sentence on this new crime that they committed after 10 years after the previous felony, well, the judge gets to choose between 2 years extra time or life in prison. Well, that's a hell of a lot of flexibility. And I would much rather come up with a way of keeping these judges accountable and making them use some common sense. Now they're talking too about, well, the judge has got to consider the cost of incarceration. Well, if we're only paying 2% of what is probably one of the biggest reasons to even have a government, to keep you and I safe from each other, I think we're spending our money wisely as it is. Um,
Yeah, I'd rather save freedom and civility rather than dollar bills and currency. I mean, let's spend our money to just to protect freedom and a civil society. I mean, it's not always about saving the money.
Well, there is no freedom if you can't walk down the street safely.
Yeah.
There is no freedom if you can't drive a car and take your wife and kids, out at night to go to dinner without getting hit by a drunk driver and everybody dying. That's not freedom. That's anarchy. So we have to come up with a way of doing this, and it's always a devil in the details. I understand a lot of what David gets into on the civil liberties, and believe me, I'm the poster child for that. I've been through it. I've seen the ugly face of it. But you can't come back from this one thing in the state of Oklahoma, in the big cities. I'm not going to talk about the little cities where there might be corruption, little county courthouses, but generally you have to work very, very, very hard multiple times before you wind up where you got an enhanced sentence.
What about this? And the thing that I kind of see us getting away from with the state question 805 is that it apparently it freezes the verbiage of what is a violent crime.
Exactly.
And it opens up all of the it doesn't grandfather, so to speak, anybody in. And so we literally lose some of the case adjustment. That flexibility, Al, you're talking about, is that if a certain person is worse than usual, then the sentence enhancement can be applied. And if what I don't understand is why they pretend that it's a maximum sentence when it can go above that. But I think, Oldham, what do you think about the concept that we're losing the exacting nature of the case when we go with 805 that kind of blankets out some of these violent offenses?
Well, that's a really good question, and I guess I missed that part of it. I just really didn't consider it as well as I should have. I don't want, and that's kind of like the problem with 780, 781. 781, made less of a crime than drugs, which is a right. It's not a crime. Like you said, it's a vice, not a crime.
Mm-hmm.
And we can't allow something that is violent to then be called nonviolence and make that the law. Now, anything can be changed and can be fixed, but again, it's hard once it's a constitutional amendment to
that's one of the biggest blows against 805 is just like, why are you opening up the patient with open heart surgery to do something that could be done in a statute? Al, what do you think about that?
Well, that's exactly right. And like the legislator said, the legislators are not going to want to overturn the will of the people. It'll make them very vulnerable in the next election. You look at what we did with the previous soft on crime legislation. Forgive me, I've forgotten the names of the darn things, the numbers. A few years back, where they basically took the drug crimes down. They upped the felonies
780 and
from
781.
500 to 1,000. There you go. Thank you. That basically reduced the amount of felonies in Oklahoma by 28.4%. They said. The problem is those crimes were still committed. They were just reclassified as misdemeanors. So now you've got, instead of putting people in the state prison, you're potentially sending them to the to the county jail for the sheriffs to take care of. Crime was not reduced. If anything, what happened was crime stopped being reported because these shoplifting cases, they just don't report them anymore because what's the use?
Right. And that's that's a standard, that's a colloquial story that you hear all the time. A friend of mine is saying, oh yeah, he's standing at the Quick Trip. Guy just comes in, not in a hurry, just shopping, picks up what he needs and walks out the door. It was like, what the heck, man?
Now
I mean,
you and I pay for that in increased.
yeah,
I'm a businessman. You got to pass these costs along. I've
yeah.
got a certain percentage when I sell a chicken feeder online. I've got a certain percentage built into that for fraud, and it's about 5%, believe it or not.
Yeah, yeah. Even if people aren't penning it in as tightly as you are, ultimately that cost is passed along. That's how it works. Hey, you guys have been listening to 3D Politics every Monday night right here on Facebook. If we can make it go across the airwaves, so to speak. Al Gerhardt, I appreciate you being on. Anything before we let you go out of here? Anything else you want to promote?
Well, I would vote no on this 805, but I would also listen to what David Oldham had to say, and let's get some changes down at the legislature, and let's have some certainty. Let's find out exactly what a career criminal is, and let's set a standard for that. Let's take a look at some of our sentences because some of them, well, in my case, they were wanting to give me 10 years in prison for blackmail. Well, there's blackmail and there's blackmail, right? And there's always shades of gray on all of these crimes. So why do we have such high minimum sentences whenever they don't make any sense? Now, you come back to, well, the prosecutor's supposed to do that and the judge. But what do you do when you got a crooked prosecutor and a crooked judge? Well, you wind up like I did. So
Right.
I'm well aware of what can go wrong. But let me tell you guys, the way to fix it is not a state constitution.
Yeah, I think that's right. And it sounds right to me. And I think we need to split off. We keep talking about nonviolent crimes, and in my mind, 80% of that's going to be drug crime. That just would I think we need to draw a finer tooth comb beyond that. Oldham, before we let Al Gerhardt, our fine guest this evening, go, any final words?
No, thank you for coming, Al. I think that this was a very valuable discussion. I think we've really hashed it out. I mean, I don't think anybody has done quite as much 3D politics to delve into this issue. And I
Yeah.
hope that we can take this, and no matter how 805 comes out, that we will continue to talk about these things because it's so vital. I mean, I don't want to see anybody go through what you've been through. I don't want to see somebody go through, be turned into an outlaw, for just being free, and just living free.
Yeah,
So,
they make a felon the same way they make a misdemeanor, by the stroke of a pen, and nobody changes their behavior. They just remanage the crime again. Once again, Al Gerhardt, Sooner Tea Party co-founder. We appreciate you, Al, being out here and suffering through all of our machinations to try to get this thing recorded and on the air. We hope to have you back again. I appreciate everything you do for state politics here in Oklahoma.
Thanks, sir.
You bet. We're going to send you away. Thanks, Al. There he goes. David, looks like I'm in the mood for a new computer. If it's gated here by me, it must be my problem. But let's talk quickly here. Oh, this will be fun. Yeah. So
we got some music.
Play a little music. Everything got discombobulated. Here we go. 3D politics. Once again, we just exited Mr. Al Gerhardt from Sooner Tea Party. We're going to talk a little bit further with David Oldham from constitutionalgrounds.com about Judge Amy Coney Barrett, stare decisis, and the drive for number 45 road rally. So David, tell us, so you've been watching any of the confirmation hearings? You've been too busy.
I have been way too busy, but I did catch it. I did catch half an hour or an hour of it, day 2 or 3, and it was very interesting. I just wished that I had, time to just sit and watch. But no, it was really interesting. She's very well spoken.
Yeah.
She's very well versed in her subject matter, as you can tell by the number of notes that she brings with her.
Right.
And so she's very well versed. I have seen a few problems, but she is much better than anybody that the left could throw up.
Right.
I see her somewhere in between a Kavanaugh and a Gorsuch. Okay. And Gorsuch is my favorite right now on the court. I see her as somewhere between Kavanaugh and Gorsuch. She's at least in giving her answers. Now, we'll find out because I've been talking with a lot of people, and some people have thrown out that she has made some political moves and that some of her cases have come down to decisions, have come down to political moves, looking forward to her potential nomination for the Supreme Court. And I mean, if that's the case, that's problematic if she was doing that. But they're hopeful, especially with abortion and some freedom of religion cases. But the one thing that I have seen again and again and again is just how badly our senators treat the Constitution.
Yeah.
And it's not on the left. This is on the right. Poor Ted Cruz. I got to pick on him. He got in and he talked about, he went into a whole dissertation about having Obamacare be such a debacle because it was one-sided and only one side decided it. Whereas Medicaid and or Medicare and Social Security were very bipartisan. I'm like, there wasn't much partisanship at the time because the Republicans were in the vast minority, but the point was that he was legitimizing these facially unconstitutional programs by saying that you know by having the other side involved, by having Republicans involved. And Republicans don't have any right to violate the Constitution any more than Democrats do. So just because the Republicans join in on the violations doesn't make them legit. And
I mean, the bipartisanship doesn't okay the authority for plunder. Just because this is democratic socialism is what that would be. But
right.
Anyway,
well, we've talked a little bit about consent. Remember, our consent is to the Constitution and the laws made in pursuance thereof.
Right.
That's what we consent to as Americans, to the form of law. We do not consent to whatever they dream up, just so long as it's bipartisan. That's democracy. That's a non-constitutional form of government. And so the thing I bring up about Cruz was she didn't disagree with it. Okay. And this goes back to the other thing that I know you wanted to talk about was this whole stare decisis.
Yeah.
Which is the idea that the court can set precedent or can kind of determine whether something is constitutional or not. And they get to be the decider of that rather than the Constitution.
Right.
And that is the problem that we have here. And her answer goes right into that stare decisis thing, because that's where he was going with it. She would not quickly overturn or rule against the Social Security system and rule it unconstitutional. Why? Because it's got broad bipartisan support. The question is, well, if that's the case, then what about abortion, since Republicans have often gone along with abortion? They say they don't, but then do. And so the question is, what would that mean in a court, in way of the court? Now, mind you, she has wowed the court. I mean, Dianne Feinstein hugged her, and for which she caught a lot of flack. Hugged her, took her mask off to hug her.
Oh, wow.
That's quite tender. And the people on the left started immediately calling for her resignation.
Sure. Medusa sheds a tear.
That Feinstein has left them behind. And so anyway, but the idea of this setting of precedent, that the that the court can declare that you don't have rights that you have. Okay, that you're not as free as freedom, um, and not by some measure that, well, you're violating somebody else's rights. That's not the determinant. That's
Right.
not the limiter. It's just by their arbitrary decision. And so we get tests that they create to allow them to do these kinds of things. And it's usually to support some government scheme that is facially unconstitutional, just blatantly unconstitutional, but they're going to try to allow it. And so they're going to, use
Rationalize,
wordplay
justify, right.
exactly to justify it. And so this idea, now mind you, there is less in the Constitution about the judiciary than any other branch of government.
Yep.
It is absolutely I mean, it doesn't even tell what they do, just decide. And so it leaves for some latitude, but again, they have to be submissive to not only the Constitution, but also the laws in pursuance thereof and the treaties in pursuance thereof. So we have, a judge has a lot on their plate, and they have no power, as Barrett rightly pointed out. Judiciary has absolutely no power. Actually, the only branch that has any actual power is the executive branch.
Yeah,
And
it's the influence, not the control.
Correct. Yeah, they can issue orders, but if people want to ignore them, then what are you going to do?
It's up to the enforcement. Yeah.
Correct. Now, if the executive doesn't enforce it, the legislative can oust them and get somebody, and which would allow for the people to get somebody in who would enforce it. But ultimately, that is a political decision, because if we, the people, say no, it's bogus, then we put pressure on the legislature so that they don't impeach a good executive from in their endeavors to carry out or to ignore bad judicial opinion. So there's this whole dance that has to happen, and in that, yes, there are things that the judiciary comes up with. They come up with the rules of the court. So there are rules that people got to know when you go to court. You're going to have to know some rules in order to get through the process.
Right.
Well, they had to come up with that. So there's a place for precedent. The stare decisis.
So the stare decisis, I mean, this is in a philosophical sense, and I'm sure it's not going to run accurate because of the language and the ages. But I mean, the idea that we will hold to the earlier precedent, doesn't that essentially bring us back to like the Magna Carta? The way I remember the Magna Carta was like, look, they told the king, this is what you said last year, and they were able to write it down. I mean, basically, they were basically pressing King, I think it was John, to whatever he said last time, and they held the king to his own word because that was the precedent of the king's word. Was that not the Magna Carta?
Well, the Magna Carta was basically a Bill of Rights. Now, remember, under the British system, the king, in this case, you're correct, John, he held all sovereignty. He was sovereign over the entire land and everyone in it, everyone and everything in it. It was his. Nobody had nothing unless he gave it to them.
Okay.
And so that's that system, pure sovereignty. Well, the people rebelled and they had a civil war, and in order to get out of the war, he had to grant some rights to his nobles and grant some rights to the people. And so it was the first of the English Bills of Rights.
Okay.
And so when you think of the Magna Carta and the English Bills of Rights, remember they have a sovereign. Okay, Here in America, there is no sovereign. Now, the Supreme Court has made up two sovereigns in the federal and state governments, but there are no sovereigns. There are no rulers in America. You rule yourself and
Yeah.
your home, your property. You rule that.
Self-governed.
Self-governed, absolutely. You are sovereign. Now, then there comes everyone else, and it's like we got to get along. So we make treaties with one another. We call those laws, and they are basically treaties. As long as we abide by the treaties to get along with each other, then there's no problem, and the government leaves us alone to do our sovereignty within our sovereignty.
Right.
And that's supposed to be the way it is. And the federal government has their aspect of things that they deal with, and the states have their aspect of things, and the locals underneath the states. But we are to be left alone. We are actually collectively the sovereign, okay, over
Right.
all
Right.
of government. So there's a difference there. And that's what is missing now in government mindset, because government always wants to rule rather than having to cajole and implore and for things. I mean, look at now, they're dictating you got to get out. Well, just go back to Katrina in New Orleans, and they dictated everybody had to evacuate their homes and they couldn't protect their property.
Yeah.
Well, where did they get that power?
Right.
There's no power for that for them. A servant doesn't dictate to the master, but that's what we've got. We've got everything flipped upside down. And so,
Right.
so the problem with the stare decisis, the way it's being held out or being practiced, is a court will come along and say, yeah, the government can rule. Okay, somehow, some way. That's usually
Right.
what it comes down to. And they make a bad decision, and everybody afterwards says, yeah, we got to stick with it. They said
It's the law.
That's the law. And it's like neither law nor good anything that anybody should be sticking with.
Right.
And so what we have to start working with people on is getting these bad decisions changed. And the biggie right now that's facing every single American is the Jacobson decision of 1905. So we're 115 years in, and it's the one that everybody uses to say that governments can dictate the masks, dictate the vaccines, the potentially the chip, or a license that proves you've been inoculated and
Right.
vaccinated against whatever they decide they want to rule us with.
And before
And-
we get out of here, I want to do the Drive for 45 road rally,
Yeah.
but real quickly, how did the precedents of slavery that was already decided all the way to Dred Scott? I mean, how did that become overturned in the face of what was precedent?
Well, Dred Scott was overturned by the Civil War.
That ought to do it.
Pretty much did it.
That ought to do it.
And because of the will of the people, then courts started changing their mindset, and they're very slow to change, but they can change. The problem is we're getting so far on that they're trying to make their rulings so nitpicky and so pointed so that they don't have to change that much, so that
Right.
things keep along in as we've talked about before, that very conservative manner, in the sense that things just keep along in a
It's not
flat
going to
line.
radically swing one way.
Not
or
going
the
to
other.
swing anything this way. It's got to stay that, and it might be always on an upswing. It might be always on a downswing, but it can't be real steep. It's got to be
Either way,
real
right.
gradual, one way or the other. But so there's a problem, because once you get going, and then you get time, you get really way off the mark.
Right.
And so it starts affecting you and I a lot more the further out we got. And we're 200 years into bad decision making that have piled on each other. And what we're seeing now is that government is wanting to really double down and expand the speed at which they want to use all this bad judicial decision making. So we're going to have a court at some point that's going to get pretty radical, you know,
Yeah.
toward a right-leaning conservative. I would want a constitutional form of governance, and they're going to have to start lopping some things off that prior courts have done. You know, they're going to have to completely change Dred Scott kind of things, and
Right.
and they're if they don't do it, they will get us into a civil war, because we're already in a civil war, and they're the cause because they won't administer justice.
Standard procedure. That's correct. You've been listening to David Oldham, constitutionalgrounds.com, right here with the verbal Viking, the plunderer of conversation, I always say. Tommy McCay, your fine host with 3D Politics, sometimes live, not tonight, however. We're having a replay, etc. But we're going to see if I can share. Were you able to share anything as far as the road rally goes? I'm going to bring this here.
No, go ahead and do that. Unfortunately, things have been so crazy with me that I did not get my pictures uploaded. Well, I got video. It took nearly 15 minutes for the parade to go by me when I was.
It's a pretty long rally.
I went to get the some video, hoping to show it tonight, and the line went from 193rd in Kenosha up the BA past Bass Pro, and they were lined up bumper to bumper, and then kicked off together
Right.
from there. And like I said, I was at 41st Street, and then I jumped up to 36th Street North at those overpasses, and the cars were solid. Took nearly 15 minutes to go by. There were
right. It's a heck of a line. Look here.
And then Channel 8 says dozens.
Yeah, I love this. Here's the channel news, Channel 8, KTUL TV News. They say that dozens of people participated in a Drive for 45 event this afternoon in Tulsa in support of the Tulsa Drive. So dozens. Somebody here, Jennifer, says it was a lot more than that. Try close to 325,
and
which means
that would be the number of cars, and most cars had 2 people in them. So
right. So you know it's going to be more.
Was a lot more than what you saw in the cars.
Exactly.
And some cars were filled. I mean, they were minivans with families in them.
Right.
But anyway, so there were the crowd was huge. They filled the old Walmart parking lot. Filled it with
nice.
Cars. So they got everybody lined up and got them. You know, it was very organized, very peaceful.
Not mostly peaceful.
No,
totally peaceful.
Completely peaceful.
What the heck was that? Kind of party is that?
And it was really neat. I mean, some of the cars that showed up and the way people had decked them out, and some of these things, just what people drive around. I mean, there was a guy who showed up in a Peterbilt with an Uber in it.
Oh, wow.
He was Ubering.
There's a paradox.
So anyway, but it was fabulous. You know, the turnout and the participation, the vibe was very upbeat.
Nice.
And so
I was surprised it got some good media attention from, even though they're downplaying it, that people mentioned it on the news.
No, it could be.
So that was
in Channel 8's, you know, just giving them all benefit, you know, of every doubt. And they were there. They were the one station that showed up. They came without their van, so that was a little weird, but they had a photographer there, and then they did have a gal who was, I think, interviewing some people. They may have left before before, all the rest of the cars showed up. So their dozens, and sadly, if they'd have stayed around until everything really kicked off, they would have seen the hundreds. But
Well, if they would give you the same benefit of the doubt you give them, they would say a baker's dozen showed up.
no,
Well,
they said dozens.
does
They just didn't say how many dozens. So, they weren't wrong. They
It
just
wasn't-
weren't very accurate.
it wasn't false advertising. It was just not very accurate.
And you know what? That was something else, because I had other places where other local stations did the exact same thing. They said
Yeah.
dozens of cars, and then you look at the train, it's like, that's not dozens.
I mean, I don't know where.
But
How
the-
does
but the-
dozens?
But the local media was saying dozens. So
See,
you
I
know,
heard it. I heard a
it may be a
news
thing.
thing years ago. I heard them, and I did a comedy routine on this. They said some car had wrecked, and it slid several dozens of feet. And I was thinking, now dozens is not an estimation. Dozen is that's literally a number, folks. So if you're going to go to the trouble to estimate with precision, there's no reason to say several dozens. That's like an exact number anyway.
we just don't
I
know
don't
how
know.
many several.
Dozens. I'm just saying several and dozens is like an oxymoron.
I know it seems weird.
Oldham, anything else before we get out of here?
No, thank you everybody for being here. And
Man,
putting up with us.
I gotta try to get this thing out across the live feed. We had all sorts of trouble. I'm gonna check to see if it's my my internet connection, my computer, maybe.
Let me know when you put it out, because I'd like to be on there and chat with people as it goes.
And to get it out, I'll let you know what's going to happen. Ladies and gentlemen, special thanks, Mr. Al Gerhardt, co-founder Sooner Tea Party, here to talk tonight, and David Oldham, constitutionalgrounds.com. I'm Tommy McCay, your fine host. We'll see everybody next week on Monday, hopefully live. I'm going to send you away, David. Thank you, David.
Good night.
There he goes. And there I go. Ladies and gentlemen, we'll see you next week.